I got handcuffed on the sidewalk in front of my own new townhouse in broad daylight with neighbors watching like it was entertainment. And the officer doing it had no idea I was his new superintendent. 8 days into the biggest job of my life, the kind of job people swear is about power. I learned something ugly. In the wrong moment, power doesn't matter if someone's already decided who you are. And yeah, that happened right there on North Orchard in Lincoln Park, the block I'd just paid a small fortune to live on because I believed, maybe foolishly, that dignity shouldn't require permission. My name's James Mitchell. I'm 52, and at the time this happened, I'd been appointed Chicago Police Superintendent exactly 8 days earlier, the first black chief in the city's history, the guy the mayor brought in to clean up a department drowning in misconduct allegations and public distrust. I'd spent 26 years in law enforcement, 3 different cities, policy work, training work, hearings, all of it. And the wildest part is I literally wrote Illinois' Police Academy training curriculum on implicit bias and racial profiling. I wrote the manual, not the inspirational poster version, the real one with protocols and steps and what to say, what not to say, how to build reasonable suspicion, how to keep your ego from turning a routine encounter into a lawsuit or a tragedy. I taught thousands of officers the difference between instinct and prejudice, between safety and control. And 3 days after I moved from Detroit with my wife Angela, she's a nurse, we've been married 28 years, and our son David, 20 years old, pre-law at DePaul, I became a case study in my own damn chapter. It was May 20th, 3:15 in the afternoon, 72 degrees. One of those perfect Chicago spring days where the sun makes everything look peaceful, even if it isn't. I was on my 4th trip from the U-Haul. The truck parked legally in a loading zone with hazard lights blinking boxes on the sidewalk, furniture visible through the open door. The most obvious, I'm moving in scene you can imagine, and I was tired in that very specific way. You get when you've been lifting heavy things and pretending you're fine. You know what I mean? Your back is screaming, but you're still trying to be the guy who carries one more box, so your family doesn't see you struggle. The townhouse cost $1. $4 million, which still sounds ridiculous coming out of my mouth, but it mattered to Angela, it mattered to David, it mattered to me in a quiet, symbolic way. Because we'd spent a lifetime watching certain spaces pretend they were open to everyone while quietly deciding who belongs. And this was supposed to be our fresh start. A clean slate, a new city, a new job, a chance to prove leadership could look like someone who'd actually lived the reality the department policed. I'd been deputy chief in Detroit, got my master's in criminal justice from Northwestern, sat on national task force meetings about police community relations, and I came to Chicago fully aware of the microscope on me. The pressure to be perfect, the pressure to be calm, the pressure to be twice as good for half the grace. So when my U-Haul rolled into Lincoln Park and I started hauling boxes into Unit 6C, I felt that weird blend of pride and anxiety, like I'd made it, and I was still waiting for the bill to come due. Then I saw the patrol car slow down. Not the normal I'm driving through slow. That deliberate crawl where the driver is watching you like you're a question he's already answered. Officer Ryan Bennett, badge number 3492, 34 years old, District 18, the district that covers Lincoln Park and Lakeview, some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Chicago. He was a former Army MP, joined CPD in 2014. 9 years on the force, never promoted beyond patrol, lived out in the suburbs with his wife Sarah, an elementary school teacher, 2 kids commuting 45 minutes each way to police, a neighborhood where homes sold for 7 figures. And in those 9 years, he'd stacked up 6 civilian complaints, every single one involving a black man, every single one resulting in 0 discipline, no sustained findings, no consequences, nothing. I didn't know all of that in that moment while I was holding a lamp and trying to find my keys, but I knew the energy, I knew the posture, I knew that hand drifting toward the holster like a reflex, and I knew the first sentence before he even opened his mouth, because I've heard it 1,000 times from both sides of the badge. "Excuse me," he said, stepping out of the cruiser, crossing the street, voice tight, eyes hard. "What are you doing here?" I turned surprised but calm, and I kept my tone neutral because you learn early that sounding offended can be treated like aggression. "Moving in," I said. "Just got the keys. I'm unloading my car." He didn't look at the U-Haul. He looked at me. "Let me see some ID." Now here's the moment where my brain split in two because the job part of me wanted to end it immediately. 3 words, "I'm your boss," and the whole thing would have evaporated. But the human part of me, the part that's been a black man in America for 52 years, wanted to see the truth. Not the respectful version people perform when they recognize power, but the real behavior an ordinary black man gets on a random afternoon in a high-value area. So I made a choice that would change everything. I didn't pull rank. I said I don't think I'm required to show ID. Am I being detained? Bennett's face tightened like I'd challenged his authority instead of asking a legal question. Turn around, he snapped. You're under arrest. I remember blinking like my brain needed a second to accept what I'd heard because it was so fast, so irrational, so unnecessary. And I said, arrested for what? He fired off a list like he was reading from a script he'd used before. Trespassing, failure to identify, resisting. And that's when you feel it, that sick drop in your stomach, because you realize the words don't matter anymore, the truth doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the story he's decided to tell, and you're about to get dragged through it. I kept my hands visible, palms open. My wallet's in my back pocket, I said. I can reach for it slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them, he barked. I froze mid-motion because I've watched too many body cam videos where reaching for a wallet becomes an excuse for a funeral. Bennett stepped closer, grabbed my arm hard enough to control, not hard enough to leave a mark, and I said, I'm not resisting. I live here. Unit 6C. He leaned in like disbelief was a right. Sure you do. Inside the building, the concierge, Carlos Martinez, saw the scene through the lobby window, and his whole body language changed like he'd seen this exact confrontation too many times. He rushed out with lease paperwork in his hands, papers fluttering, and he called out, Officer, he's moving in today. His name is on the lease. Unit 6C. It's all right here. Bennett didn't even glance at it. Step back, he ordered Carlos. This doesn't concern you. Carlos stood his ground, and I'll never forget the look on his face. Not heroic, not dramatic, just tired, like not again. Across the street, a retired teacher named Emily Rodriguez started filming from her window, and a guy in Unit 5B, David Okonkwo, was already on the phone with 911 because he'd seen enough too. Bennett tightened his grip and said, Turn around, hands behind your back. I could feel the heat of the sun on my neck, the concrete under my shoes, the eyes on me from windows and sidewalks, and I thought this is exactly the kind of moment people think only happens in dark alleys at 2 a.m. But it's happening at 3:15 on a beautiful day in a neighborhood where people take brunch photos, and I'm standing here with a lamp and a box cutter in my pocket being treated like I'm a threat. I pulled my arm back, not violently, just firmly, and Bennett took that as permission to escalate. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he snapped. Stop resisting. I'm not resisting, I said, voice still calm, but harder now. I'm not trespassing. I live here. In my head, my training was running like a checklist. Articulable facts, reasonable suspicion, the Terry standard, what you say, what you document. And he had none of it. No crime witnessed, no call for service, no description, no threat. Just a black man with boxes in Lincoln Park. And that's when I decided if I'm going to be forced into this moment, I'm going to document it. I lowered my voice and said, Officer Bennett, badge number 3492. He flinched like hearing his own identifier out loud made him aware of consequences for the first time. What did you just say? He demanded. Your badge number, I repeated. I'm giving you one more chance to reconsider what you're doing. He didn't hear it, or he didn't care. And that right there is the scariest kind of officer, the one who can't feel the cliff until he's already stepped off it. Dispatch crackled over the radio. Officer needs assistance, possible confrontation. 121 North Orchard, and Sergeant Patricia Coleman was 3 blocks away when she heard it. Coleman had been CPD for 15 years. She knew that address, knew that block, and she'd just spent the past week in transition meetings with me, so before she even turned the corner, her stomach dropped. She rolled up, saw Bennett gripping my arm, saw Carlos holding paperwork, saw Emily filming from a window, saw David on his phone, and she hit the brakes so hard her SUV rocked. She was out of the car before it fully stopped. Bennett, she shouted, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Stop. Step back now. Bennett turned confused, still gripping me like he thought letting go would make him look weak. Sarge, I got this, he said. Suspect is refusing to comply. Coleman didn't even hesitate. That's not a suspect, she snapped. That's Superintendent James Mitchell, your boss. Silence. The kind of silence that makes the air feel thin. Bennett's face drained of color so fast it was almost comical, except nothing about it was funny. His hand fell away from my arm. The hand that had been reaching for cuffs started to shake. Coleman turned to me, flushed, embarrassed, furious. Sir, I apologize. she started. I held up my hand. "Don't apologize to me, Sergeant," I said. "Apologize to every black man Officer Bennett has profiled over the past 9 years who didn't have a badge to protect him." Then I looked at Bennett and let my voice drop low. "You just attempted to arrest the Chicago police superintendent for the crime of moving into his own home. In the next 72 hours, this body cam footage will be reviewed by Internal Affairs, by the FBI Civil Rights Division, and probably by every major network in the country. Do you understand what you've done?" Bennett's mouth opened, and nothing came out. Finally, he managed, "Sir, I didn't know." "Exactly," I said. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw a black man in Lincoln Park and assumed I was a criminal. That's called racial profiling, Officer Bennett. And I literally wrote the training manual on it." Behind me, someone muttered, "About time," and someone else said louder, "He does this to people all the time," and Carlos quietly said, "Yes, he does," like he'd been waiting years for someone to finally listen. Emily uploaded her video at 4:22 p.m. with a simple caption, and by 6 p.m., it had 500,000 views by midnight. It was in the millions by Sunday morning. It was the lead story everywhere, the headline reading some version of the same question. If this happened to the police chief, what happens to everyone else? My son David saw it from his dorm room and called me, voice shaking. "Dad, are you okay? I saw how he grabbed you. What if you weren't the chief?" I stood in the kitchen of my new townhouse surrounded by boxes, holding my phone like it weighed 50 pounds, and I couldn't answer right away because the honest answer was probably yes. Yes, I would have been taken in, booked, and left to figure it out like so many other men have, and I hated that truth. Angela found me an hour later still staring at the wall. She said, 28 years quiet but cutting. 3 cities. You finally make superintendent. This was supposed to be our fresh start, and this is your welcome to Chicago. The mayor held an emergency press conference. The union issued a statement defending protocol protesters gathered outside headquarters, and then the FBI Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation. Internal Affairs flagged 47 similar complaints from District 18 over 5 years, 91% involving black men, and not one of those complaints had resulted in discipline. Not one. They pulled Bennett's history, and it was the same pattern on repeat. The 2016 stop and frisk of a DePaul student with no description produced the 2019 traffic stop that turned physical, the 2021 confrontation with a tech worker carrying groceries to his own condo, backed down only when a manager intervened, and in the building, Carlos told investigators, "We call him the problem. He patrols this block like he owns it, always stops black visitors, always demands ID, always acts like they're criminals until proven otherwise." The body cam review was damning. No reasonable suspicion, no crime witnessed, no articulable threat, just assumptions dressed up as officer safety, and Bennett's defense crumbled under basic scrutiny. He claimed multiple break-ins on the block. Records showed none in 6 months. He claimed I refused ID. The video showed I never refused. I asked a lawful question. He claimed I matched a description. No description existed. No call came in. No bolo. He made it up. After a 30-day review, I recused myself from the decision because I refused to let anyone say this was personal, and the acting command fired Bennett for conduct unbecoming racial profiling and false arrest. The union appealed. Arbitration upheld the firing. The FBI released findings describing a pattern of discriminatory policing and supervisory failures, and while they didn't file criminal charges, they recommended federal oversight because intent is hard to prove and impact isn't. And that's where people get stuck, right? Because the system loves technicalities. It loves insufficient evidence. It loves officers' word versus civilians' word. Bennett lost his job, lost his pension because he hadn't vested, got banned from law enforcement in Illinois, entered into misconduct databases, his family fell apart under the weight of it, and you can call that justice. But I keep thinking about the years before me, the years when he had 6 complaints and 0 consequences, the years when the victims didn't have a title, didn't have a platform, didn't have a city, staring at a body cam clip. And I can't shake the question, why does accountability only show up when the person harmed has institutional power? I stood at a podium later with Angela on one side and David on the other, cameras everywhere, and I said the only honest thing I could say. In 90 seconds, Officer Bennett made me feel exactly what millions of black Americans feel every single day. Powerless, scared, guilty for existing in my own neighborhood. Then I told the city what we were changing. Independent oversight with subpoena power, mandatory body cam review, When a civilian complains, a required checklist documenting reasons for every stop that aren't based on appearance, quarterly public reports, so communities can see who we're stopping and why. And people applauded, and I appreciated that, but applause doesn't fix what's broken. The uncomfortable truth is, we still have qualified immunity-shielding officers from consequences. We still have union contracts that make it painfully hard to fire repeat offenders. We still don't have a truly reliable national database that stops someone from getting fired in one place and hired in the next county with a new badge number. And we still have a culture that trains officers to demand compliance instead of earning trust. So here's what I want to ask you, and I don't want a polite answer. I want the real one. If you watched that video and I wasn't the superintendent, if I was just a delivery driver moving into a better life, do you believe Bennett would have faced consequences at all? Do you think reform is real if it depends on viral footage and public pressure every single time? And what would you do if you saw a situation like that outside your building? Would you film like Emily? Would you step out like Carlos? Would you call 911 like David? Or would you keep walking because you don't want trouble? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me where you stand on right and wrong, on bias and power, on what justice should look like when the victim doesn't have a badge. And if you've ever lived through something like this, I want you to share it, because silence is how patterns survive, and I'm done pretending we can fix a system if we refuse to talk about what it does to ordinary people when nobody important is watching.